Hello again. We are going to start another table about two topics that I love, no? Disabilities and gender. No? Both, in fact, are the topics of the unit of equality or diversity in the university and also of my research. In the first place, we are talking about gender. In the University of Castilla-La Mancha, we have the equality plan in order to achieve the equality between men and women at the university. But just to say that although overall in the last academic year more women than men enrolled, 56 compared to 44, women's access to technical and scientist careers, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, is one of the aspects on which all universities must continue to work because it's only 25 more or less. In informatics, it's less, no? In some engineering, is different. Then, to talk about this, about technology, gender, artificial intelligence, we have Silvia Rueda Pascual. She's an informatics engineer and PhD in the computer science engineering from the University of Valencia. She's currently advisory member in the cabinet of the Minister of Science, Innovation and Universities and head of the Women and Science Unit in the Ministry of Science and Innovation in Spain. In addition, she is a vice president of the Official Professional Association of Computer Engineering of the Valencian Community. Between 2022 and 2023, she was territorial head of the Regional Department of Innovation, University, Science and Digital Society. Until then, she was professor at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Valencia, where she became the first female head. She has developed her research in virtual reality and computer graphics, software engineering, human-centered software development and digital gender gap, and she has also been responsible for the STEAM University of Valencia within the Vice Rector's Office for Equality, Diversity and Sustainability, and director of the Chair of Digital Gender Gap and coordinator of the Girls for STEAM project, aimed at promoting STEAM vocations, especially among girls. She's an expert in this area. Then thank you very much. Above all, because of the situation in Valencia, where 1 month ago, tomorrow is 29th, we are very happy to have you here with us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome. I'm really, really happy to be here today with all of you. And I want to talk to you about inclusive gender equality education as a key role for social change. I mean, we need technology, artificial intelligence to become a bridge to get this equality in our society, and it's our purpose. Okay, we all know that technology, all these different areas that we have are really part of its day of any of us. Since the pandemic, we use telecommunications, video conferencing, but it's all around. Young people, they using video games, but it's a special part of any situation of our lives. But we also need to understand that this artificial intelligence evolvement has led us to many different good opportunities. I mean, for instance, we have here 4 different examples. We now can prepare videos telling the generative AI a few words and to have this amazing view in movement. We also can use it for teaching, indeed, and use it as it's very helpful for teachers and students. And regarding science and medical studies, we have this new opportunity to advance, and artificial intelligence can be a tool to help to detect, for instance, breast cancer up to 5 years before its development. So it could be really, really helpful in science and medical studies. But we also have many dangers when using artificial intelligence and other technologies. We have deep fake news that are already present not only in politics, but also affecting real lives, as we can generate a video with our faces or any other person faces. It can be used to not very profit endings. So we need to consider this balance between benefits, but also the dangers that we have when using technology. In this balance, we need to understand that all kinds of technologies can be useful, but we need that it will be useful for every person in our society. I'm going to bring you some examples of not being as useful for everyone. This is an example. Carlos San Juan, it was very well known here in Spain. She started a campaign called I'm Old, Not Stupid, because for elderly people it's very, very complicated to use technology. If they are forced to go out when using, for instance, bank accounts to get money, for instance, it could be very excluding for them. So he started this campaign in order to consider that technology is not always so easy to use for everyone. Also, we have many, many examples in ICT sector. For instance, in video games in 2019, it was the first time that we got this joystick, which is has been developed with gender perspective. And why a joystick needs to have gender perspective? Because the distance between the thumb and the index fingers are more than 1 centimeter shorter in women than men. So we cannot access to the buttons. So it's more complicated for us to use this technology. It's not that we cannot play video games. We can, but it's harder for us. Also, I don't know if you read about this notice that is in the news. It was in 2018, and it was an expert system that used it by Amazon. That this system learned about the many curricula about people working in ICT sector. So, as there are so few women in this sector, the system learned that it was not a good quality to be a woman. So the system did not recommend to contract any woman. We also have problems with the speech recognition. Still, technology has serial problems recognizing women voices, which it's not happening with men voices. and also with facial recognition. It was pointed out by Joey Wolamwini, sorry. She's a computer science and activist, digital activist that used to work in the MIT, and she made an experiment that showed that all these Amazon, Kairos, and all these fashion recognition softwares have several problems recognizing and identifying women with dark skin faces. In fact, the problem is only if she wears this white mask, the system can't recognize her. And it's still happening today. And it's not a problem of the accuracy of the algorithm, because the system recognized successfully 100% of images of light-skinned men. So with men, it's no problem. Also, about generative artificial intelligence, we have many problems also. As you can see here, when the software is asked to give us an image of a well-paid occupation, a person working in a well-paid occupation, the system only gives us images of white men. We only get racial persons or women when we ask for an image of low-paying occupation. And the problem is that we need to understand that algorithms, technology has bias. I mean, science, technology, at the end, it depends on what people are doing to develop these technologies. So as people, all of us are affected by biases. Everything we made is affected also by this bias. I want to make a point about this concept of bias. It's defined by the disproportionate weight in favor or against the thing, but the important thing here is everyone, each one of us has bias. We need to understand that these biases are an evolutionary necessity for our brain to respond quickly to complex stimuli. So we can develop these biases towards or against an individual, an ethnic group, or a sexual gender identity, or many things. But we need to remember that we all are biased. And this bias, for instance, it has been studied how affect our bias to technology. In this example, we can see the many points in where this bias, this different weight of data that we have, that is the main problem. We have thousands of lots and lots of more information about white men than other persons in our society. And those are all the points when you are training an artificial intelligence that can arise about bias. But the most important thing is that when you ask a system to give you advice, if the system is biased, people tend to adapt their decisions to the results of this artificial intelligence, and the influence can persist even when the assistant is not longer present. So if we have a technology that is biased, it also increases our internal bias. So we need to change this, and science, technology, and innovation can help to change those things, to close their gaps if we are using properly. But we can create new bias, new gaps if we don't use properly. So some data about this situation we don't have a diverse ICT sector. We don't have many people with difference represented in these areas. For instance, most people working in the ICT sector are men, both in the European area as in Spain, where women represent only 18% of digital specialists. And in 2023, in Spain, more than 70% of ICT sector companies did not employ any at all women. Moreover, although the entrepreneurship rate is 6% for both men and women, only 1 on 5 Spanish startups is led by a woman, and they occupy positions related to business development and marketing, but not so many to technology. Also, it's very important to take into consideration that women receive less funding. In the case of public fundings, it's around 30% of the funding, but in private investments rounds, women only receive about 4% of the total available funding. It's very, very huge difference. Also, we need to consider that it's not this situation has no profit for our society nor our economy, because startups led by women are more successful. They have a lower business mortality rate than men, are more solvent, have less debt, and are better on repaying loans. Also, we have many different studies, like this one here, that says that ethnic and gender diversity correlate with better financial performance. And also, we have a recent study in Spain from this very same year that states that the opportunity cost associated with gender gap in the entrepreneurship amounts to more than 16 billion euros. So we need to face these problems because it's going to be profit for all of the society, not only for women, but for all of us. But we need to think that this doesn't mean that we need to change women nor other minority communities. We don't have to change people to get, it's important to get digital skills. It's important to get skills to be part of this ICT sector. But it's not a matter of changing people. It's a matter of changing the system and removing the barriers that keep us outside these sectors. And also, very important, is to rethink that we need to change the knowledge. It's not a matter of changing the Einstein discoveries. It's a matter of rethinking if we have only a student, for instance, for medical or pharmaceutical research, they are performed only on male individuals, and female are treated as an anomaly. So that we need to rethink the conclusions that we have already in our knowledge, and also to rethink how we develop new science, new research, new technology that considers the diversity of all the society and are taken place to cover all the necessities in our society. For doing that, it's very important to have inclusive gender analysis in all the areas. This inclusive gender analysis enriches science, technology, engineering. If we use this point of view, studying how sex, gender, and other intersectional factors influence in all phases of research development, education, we are going to get better science, better technology for all of us. And it's really, really important. And we also have to think that education is the key that we have to change social stereotypes, promote gender equality, and eliminate the stereotypes that are the causes of these gaps. So we have a key role in education to change this situation. And as the most important point, I think, that we need to think when we are talking about inclusive gender analysis in education. For the question, so all subjects include inclusive gender analysis, and the answer is yes, always. Sex will be relevant when studies involve humans or animals, or when their tissues or cells are analyzed. Gender will be relevant when studies involve humans and the interactions between them. So I mean always, because there is always a human present. And it will also be necessary to consider other factors, racial, cultural, social, economic, all of the this image in the previous slide, that intersect with sex and gender, to consider all the diversity in our society. It's important that we think it's not a matter of the government, of the administration. The administration can define policies to change things, but it is also crucial, it is also necessary that institutions, companies, universities, all of us promote this inclusion of inclusive gender analysis in all the areas, in teaching, in research, and also in the spirit of the institutions. But institutions are not an enter, institutions are us. Institutions are people that make everyday decisions about what to do and how to do it. So we can do things to change this situation. We can decide how to teach, we can decide how to research, and we can influence also in the future generation of ICT specialists. So let's make this change together. Thank you.
It's a pleasure introduce Professor Johan Beckmann. Thanks to him, we had the opportunity to spend an amazing month at the University of Pretoria in South Africa in September 2019, a few months before the pandemic. We visited a wonderful country, multicultural and full of history from many points of view, and for that I have to thank Johan and his family. But not only that, it also gave me the opportunity to meet Juanita Bormann, whom I met again at this conference. And for all of this, I'm very grateful and feel fortunate to work at the University of Castilla-La Mancha, to make these opportunities to travel abroad. Johan Beckmann, you know him obviously, is a professor emeritus specialized in education law, management, policy, and leadership in the Faculty of Education, the University of Pretoria. Since January 2020, he has been a research fellow at the University of Free State. He has published national and international in journals and has supervised more than 50 postgraduate students. He has been active in the South African Education Law Association, the Education Management Association of South Africa, and the Education Association of South Africa. He received honorary medals for this contribution to education in general and to research in education in particular. He also taught at the University of Jyväskylä. I don't know the name because it's in Finland. Perhaps I don't know, someone can help me, no? And of the Institute of Educational Leadership. Johan, thank you for being here. For her, it's a pleasure to have you here when you want.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure you were all surprised when you saw the title or the name South Africa in a paper that's delivered at a conference of the European Education Law Association. I'm not going to try and explain that in full, but what I'm going to try and do is not to delve deeply into all the topics, but what I would like to do is to say, if we take an overall look of disabilities, inclusive education, the failure of inclusive education in South Africa and the enigma that we have, the puzzle, the thing that we can't sort out. I'll just see if we put those 5 things together, does it say something for us? This is going to be my last visit to Europe since meeting colleagues from Europe in 1995, not 1975. And one of those colleagues is sitting here. It's the Honorable Professor Jan de Groof. I would like to thank Prof. Pablo for all the arrangements and the organizing committee for making it possible for me to come. But let me just say that if I had not met Professor de Groof and his colleagues on that day in 1995, many things would not have happened. I would certainly not have gone into education law studies. We would never have founded an organization for education law that has made wonderful progress, Prof. de Groof, that has included people at university level, administrators from education departments, postgraduate students. The organization is really growing fast, and that would not have been possible if 1995 had not occurred. And all he said to me on that day was, we, and there were 4 of them, are here to see if we can help promote education law in this country. Professor de Groof, the answer is yes, and it was all due to your efforts. So if we talk about South Africa, of course it's not part of Europe. It's a small country at the southern tip of the world, indicated by an arrow. And the question that I'm asking is, can South Africa link inclusive education, artificial intelligence, to improve education for disabled learners? It's not, can we solve the problem? Can we improve? Now, I'm not going to talk about every item that comes on the screen. You all know that since 1994, it is now a multiracial, multilingual country with the functions of a modern democracy. The negotiations about the future of South Africa started from this triad of United Nations documents, and the people in South Africa negotiated a new constitution from it. And I must say there was no bloodshedding. Now, one of the things that we stressed in our conclusions about what should be in our constitution is the right to a basic education must be made available to everyone. And I'll explain later on why I emphasized the word everyone. Now, this right to basic education will be mixed with other rights that you can't take away from it. What you must remove from your system is systematic segregation of students with disabilities from mainstream schools. I'm afraid that is happening. One thing that the Constitution says is nobody, no learner may be refused admission on the basis of race and disability and so on. Just one interesting fact is South Africa is not a typical African country. And what I say here is up to 1994, 30 years ago, it was governed by white minorities. About 8% of the population. And up to 1994, it was actually still subject to the British Empire government, with the highest ranking official, the superior official was the British Governor General. Number 7 is just an interesting thing. Some people believe that if a right is written into a constitution, nothing can be done with it, to it, about it. It's not true in South Africa. Section 36 of our constitution says you can limit rights. Of course, subject to legal provisions. I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about this guy, Spies, Arrow. He is a lawyer, he's always attacking the government. But the thing that he says is that Section 12 of our Schools Act authorizes the minister to build more schools. More schools. But what Spies has seen is a decrease from 25 million in 2009 to 22.5 million in 2023. So some government was asleep somewhere. The bad thing is that in the same period, the number of learners increased from 11.8 million to 12.7 million. Roughly speaking, schools were needed for 1 million learners. Number 11 says the Schools Act allows the government to provide public schools for learners with special education needs. And there's a severe shortage of them and a severe shortage of educators. Number 14 is a very interesting component of our Constitution, which says in section 28.2 that a child's best interests are of paramount interest in every matter concerning the child. I was worried about this for a long time, but people have convinced me it means that the interests of the child are always superior to others. Then just very quickly, in 2001, our government published a white paper about inclusive education. And look at the title of this white paper: Special Needs, Education, Building an Inclusive Education and Training System. My question is now, what do you want to do? You talk about 3, 4 things here. What is it that you want to do? Then number 18 here says that in the Schools Act, that's SASA, Section 5A, Section 5.1, says that the public school must service educational needs of disabled children without unfairly discriminating in any way. And what is happening, for instance, is that it takes schools 4 weeks to decide where they want to place a disabled learner. Now, if that is not unfairly discriminating, I don't know what is. Then another interesting thing is in section 5.2 that the governing body of a school, which unlike what I heard this morning, does not consist of teachers, mostly of parents. But they may not apply any test that is relevant to the admission of a learner to a public school. Because in the process of administering a test, they can discriminate against the child. And what happened early after 1994 was that governing bodies applied language tests, and the children that failed those tests were not admitted. Okay, this is inclusive education. Or exclusive education. Now, I try to make it very easy for myself. Inclusive education says, come in, please. Don't stay outside. We will work on it. And what we'll do in that process is we'll open up your future for you. But if we say exclusive education, it's like closed doors. You'll never get in there. You'll never benefit from it. Right, A says, we may never exclude children with special education needs. I'd say wonderful, but that is unfortunately not all there is to say. Just below that, I quote a case in the Western Cape, 2011, which was between the Western Cape Forum for Intellectual Disability against the government of the Republic. So what that tells me is there was a contention about whether certain learners should be admitted or not. And what the people who represented those children said was, the state did not do enough, did not establish enough schools for learners with severe learning disabilities, and by that they mean people with IQs 20 to 25 and below. That was the policy of the government. They didn't allow such children. And then this forum in the Western Cape challenged the constitutionality of the state's action on the grounds of there were no schools and there was no favorable financial support. I was amazed when I read now that basic education is free, but not for disabled children. It's one of those things that I can't explain. The education department put forward this argument. Now, if you take these children with the IQs that are so low, no education is going to mean anything. You're wasting your money. All right, and then the court's decision was the state didn't do what it could. There was unfair discrimination and a violation of human dignity, and the state did not provide education. So this court case is where we start when we talk about can a school refuse a child entry. Now, inclusive education is to me a very interesting thing. It's not just a theory, but it's actually a universal, entrenched right. Yes. And what does that mean? This is a system that accepts all learners. It includes them fully. Sports, culture, academy. And then the important thing is this makes education a part of social decision-making and funding, and that is a mess because you have too many people involved. Now, we've been talking about this. UNESCO says in 2021 there were 250 million learners out of school. Now, just briefly about South Africa. Now, you see I underlined the word HRW, Human Rights Watch. I looked at independent research bodies and their reports. So this is not the South African government telling us how good they are. This is what independent bodies say. And the first thing is they say there's no reliable data. And you can't believe it, but there are 8 government agencies involved in decision-making about education. 8. Now, how you make a decision by getting 8 agencies together, I don't know. And then the Human Rights Watch, you know, that is a United Nations body, says according to their estimates, there are 600,000 children out of school in South Africa. Children that should be in school. And they said something very interesting. They asked those 8 agencies to provide information from them, and the 8 agencies varied from, there was one who said 30,000, and there was one who said there was 597,953. Yeah. So I would say that these 30,000 people are government agencies and they believe they're doing a good job. This is people who are pointing their fingers at people who are not doing their work. Now, there is a rugby stadium in Pretoria. This one here, it takes 60,000 people. Now, to show you what it would take to show you 600,000 learners, you would have to fill 15 stadia like that. That's not bad. Those children are all suffering. They all have no future. And then I have talked about the fact that inclusive education is not free. And there's this interesting thing. At one stage, the government said, listen, we will increase the number of special education schools from 30 to 500. And then I see the South Africans say, we'll have to look again. Then there is an organization in South Africa, Equal Education. Well, what it says is, forget about that white paper. It's worth nothing. And then it says, please don't put disabled learners with other learners. Full service schools, make them inclusive schools. And then one thing that I know troubles principals of schools a lot is that the Auditor General said the schools are receiving 0 support from school-based support teams. It's very bad to hear that the principal calls the support team to help, and in the end the principal helps the support team. That's not how it should be. Then two other groups, the Public Interest Law Center, just said the inclusive education did not meet its objectives. The Human Rights Watch says the government needs to say sorry, we haven't met our things. Then the Human Rights Watch says this thing, is it possible that we can just leave 600,000 children without doing anything? Next thing is that it says, 3, you must consult children and parents before you place them in a school. Next one is that remove all barriers that block disabled children. In other words, don't ask them school fees. And this one says in 5 of the 9 provinces, children were turned away from schools just because they had a disability. And that is a sincere form of discrimination. Now, inclusive education, artificial intelligence, I know nothing about, but I consulted a document from IBM. But I heard this on the news the last day that I wrote this. There's only one primary school in South Africa with 1.2 million learners. Only one school that uses artificial intelligence. And what does IBM say? Artificial intelligence is technology that helps stimulating human learning, comprehension, problem solving, decision-making, creativity, and autonomy. That all says to me that artificial intelligence can play a role. But do not think that because of artificial intelligence you can fire all teachers tomorrow and replace them by robots. And yeah, this is just what IBM says, how artificial intelligence has developed. Then just some of the benefits of artificial intelligence, which will help educators, which could help the system. One is that you can automate tasks that are repetitive. A teacher doesn't have to do the same thing over and over again. Educators can get more and faster insight from data. Then decision-making can be enhanced. We can reduce human errors. And educators can use artificial intelligence 24 hours per day. There's no library doors that are blocked. And it says they can reduce physical risks. Now, just want to stress this thing. Education, if you ask yourself, what is it? It is to accompany a child to adulthood. But that accompaniment is done by an adult. So if you remove an adult from education, you have a problem. And the last thing, I just ask you a question here. Will a combination of South Africa and human rights and inclusive education and artificial education lead to better inclusive education. Okay, you don't have to shout the answers. I know what my answer is, and it is the same as what IBM says. Right, sorry. I just want to stress this one thing again, number D. I'm asking the question, how can one country not do anything about 600,000 learners that get no education, that have no possibilities in their future? Thank you.
We are going to listen to Kurt Willems. His curricula is very rich, but I only focus on some points. He is professor in education law at the University of Leuven. He is head of the Leuven Center for Public Law. He assists the rectory in education matters, and his key areas of research include, among all, research on the intersection between education law and discrimination law, above all, the position of learners with disabilities in education, or the relationship between religion and education.
Sorry, I stole 5 minutes.
Another research is citizenship education and didactics of legal teaching. Kurt is author of various contributions in Belgian and international journals and books. He's a member of the editorial boards of several journals. He's also judge in the appeal chamber of evaluation decision of educator of subsidized non-state schools, and is substitute judge in the equivalent appeal chambers for education of state schools, and judge in the appeal chamber of quality assessment of higher education institutions. Many things. And he's also one of the director of ELA and the president of ICOR, Flemish Inter-University Center for Education Law. Thanks, Kurt, for being between us, and you have the floor.
Thank you for being so gracious to give me the floor to present some of my research. Also, thank you for reading out my resume. It sounds, like you said, wide and varied, but when I talk about my resume with my husband, the only answer you get is be home more often, don't work as much. So there's a balance to be found in everything. And before I start, I would also want to stress what a privilege it is to be subsequent to the final lecture of Johan Beckmann in Europe. You've said things would not have been the same if you hadn't met Jan de Grove in 1995, but there's a whole generation of researchers that came after you who were able to talk to you, who were able to read what you've written. So you've influenced so many people yourself by choosing for education law. So it's a privilege to follow your lecture. And then getting to the lecture, I'll try to be brief because actually we should be debating by now. And I do not want to step on the lunch, since dinner learned us that lunch probably would be excellent. So what I'll do is I'll just show you a couple of things that I've done on inclusive education since I've developed together with, and I'll talk about them later, Siho, a number of manuals and guidebooks on how to implement inclusive education. So I'll show you what is out there and then you can look at it afterwards. And so inclusive education, we all know the legal framework stems from Article 24 CRPD. There's a difference between inclusive education and reasonable accommodation. The one is the individual request of people with disabilities to have accommodation for the disability, to place them in the same starting position as others. It's a conditional right in the sense that only when the request is proportionate and reasonable, you have to say yes. And if you refuse, even though a request was proportionate and reasonable, it's discrimination. You can go to court, you have the right to something that is reasonable. Inclusive education, the thing we're talking about now today, is something different. It's not about an individual request from a student. It's a systemic change to an education system, systemic change within the school, aimed at all students, not an individual request, but aimed at making it accessible to all students, so that no 600,000 students are left outside, or learners are left outside of schools. It's also the field where we have, as Jan started, disappointing case law, but there's an excuse for a judge, since there's nothing clear you can ask in court. Since it's a systemic change, there's a lot of discretionary margin on how to implement this systemic change, which also means that if you ask a judge to order, especially give an injunction to a government, the judge should say, perhaps it's not my task to give an injunction to a government on how to do something when they have such wide discretionary margins. So it's understandable disappointment when I read case law on inclusive education. I've done a number of presentations in ELA on reasonable accommodation and or inclusive education in primary and secondary education. We talked about this in Leuven when I compared the case law of the European Court of Human Rights with the European Committee on Social Rights, seeing how they interpreted Article 24. And we've talked about the disappointment in the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, who do not take a lot of desegregation measures for inclusive education. They do so for the desegregation measures for Romas, for example, for social and economic disadvantage, even though the legal basis to do so, it's much less strong than it is for inclusive education for disabilities, and even though the European Court of Human Rights nonetheless is less strict on disabilities than it is on social economic integration. We've talked about this in Bologna when I presented a strategy that we could implement as ELA to work on either reasonable accommodation, either inclusive education. We've talked on how we could do this as academics. We've talked about how we could do this as lawyers, and how we could do this as activist service to society. And there's a number of publications that I have written or co-written with some co-authors. So if you have questions about any of the items I've just presented because you were not there, then talk to me afterwards and I'll gladly provide you with the documentation. But what I would like to do today briefly is show you work I've done recently in higher education on making higher education institutions more inclusive. And when we talk about higher education institutions and making them more inclusive, I'm not only academic or activist or lawyer, but all of a sudden I'm also a stakeholder since I'm one of the professors in higher education. And when I'm talking about making it more inclusive, it's not, well, it is a systemic change, but as said here before, systems are people, and I'm one of those people. So I've asked myself, what would I need to make it more inclusive? And the answer was also possible, because I know the legal framework, not so much a legal analysis, but tell me what to do. Tell me which inclusive measures are smart to implement or not smart, under which preconditions they would be effective, how would they not harm the learning status of all learners, but indeed be beneficial for those who are the target groups, which is the one for disabilities. Tell me what to do. So that's what I've done together with CIHO, and CIHO is a Center for Inclusive Higher Education. So it's a government-funded agency in Belgium aimed at making universities and university colleges more inclusive. So we've delved a bit into the legal framework, but mostly into the education research, telling us which type of inclusive measures could be functional and under which preconditions. And as was also said this morning, there is some research available, but there's not a lot of research available on using digital technologies on making higher education institutions more inclusive. And the research that is available is mostly in experiment settings, but not necessarily in true education settings, let alone examination settings. And obviously, there's a difference between experiments and true examinations, where there's a stress factor for the students, etc. But nonetheless, we got a message by the other universities and university colleges. They were very much interested, and they were doing this. They're working on inclusive strategies. And they said, we are more than willing to pool our knowledge. And I do know this is a European perspective. So when I say the universities, university colleges are more than willing to share what they've done so far, they start from a privileged position. The digital infrastructure is more or less there in the Flemish university, university colleges. There is, of course, social and economic inequality in Belgium as well as in other countries, but it's not as large, the gap, the dividing gap, as it is in other parts of the world. So the access to the software, to the infrastructure on behalf of the students is also in a privileged position. But because of that privileged position, universities were already working on this. They had strategies, they had experimented, they had enrolled some inclusive measures for students, and they said, okay, we'll share everything, we'll share what we've done, we share our strategies, we share our disappointments, we'll share our reluctance, and pull it together and make it available for all of the higher education institutions. And that is what I've done together with the Center of Inclusive Education. So we've published a manual on how to implement inclusive measures, and we've published almost 25 leaflets with different measures you could take and under which preconditions they would work. For example, offer class recordings to everyone. Is it smart, not smart? What are the preconditions? Give your PowerPoints beforehand, smart, not smart. All those type of things. If you use PDF, then how to make sure your PDF is accessible. If you use Word, how to make sure your Word is accessible, which services are there to translate courses through Braille or reading aloud software. So all those items that you could think about making your courses more inclusive, we've not only written a manual, but also leaflets, so you can just pick the leaflet you need and implement it, trying to make it as accessible as possible. So, I'll show you some of it, although I need to say it is in Dutch, because it's in Flemish. It's for Flemish higher education institutions, although, long live technology, I've run DeepL on some of the documents yesterday evening to be able to show it, and it works perfectly. So if you're interested, then feel free to, well, obviously, first take the paying version of DeepL, because then you can run PDFs and Word documents through it, get to the English translation, and then annul your subscription, so you have 30 days and you don't have to pay anything for the English translation. So, inclusive measures, what do we mean by it? We mean that the universities and university colleges, they look at the individual requests that are made most times by students. What is it that they need? Is it more examination time? Is it the ability to ask questions during the exam if they understood something correctly? Is it the access to class recordings? Which type of questions do you get most often? And if you get them most often, could you make them available to all without applying for a special status beforehand? That's the difference between the individual accommodation and the inclusive measure, if it's available to all, or if you have to ask for it, and there is a procedure to get to a specific status to obtain the facility in use. So that's the inclusive measures. The universities saw the opportunities, especially post-COVID, using the digital technologies that are out there now. There is class recordings possible in most auditoria, even though before COVID, almost none of the auditoria had a camera to film class recordings. There are collaborative classrooms, there are collaborative digital platforms. There's so many things that are available now to think about, of making it available to everyone. And there's learning analytics. You can track what students did with the thing you made available to them. Which type of video did they watch most often? Which did they rewatch most often? You can learn something from it, which apparently topic that I'm teaching is the most difficult to them because they keep rewatching the video. I'm perhaps not explaining it correctly. So there is a lot of opportunities post-COVID by the sudden increase in digital technologies in the universities. There are, however, also a lot of concerns in the higher education institutions. There's concern on equality between students. If we make a facility available to all, then do we end up harming or indirectly discriminating the disabled student, because they are the one who are primarily aimed at. So how to make sure when we make it available to all, we don't indirectly discriminate is a concern that we took into account. How do we make sure we don't damage the learning progress? There's, and I will come to it later if I have the time, there's research, education research showing that if you make class lectures available to all, that you might end up harming the learning process of everyone in the auditorium because they end up binge watching the lectures instead of, we've talked about this, scaffolding their learning experience properly. It's a valid concern how to make sure when you implement something inclusively, you don't end up harming the learning experience of all. And there's also a lot of reluctance, or not a lot, but there is some reluctance of professors who do not see the need for inclusive measures, since they look at their own teaching experience and they say, well, the way I teach and the way I do or do not make my class lectures available, the way I do or do not make presentations available beforehand, where I show the digital material I provide or do not provide, it works for my auditorium. If we look at the success rate of my courses, almost everyone succeeds in getting a high mark, and it's a high bar that so there's no need for inclusive measures. But then if that is your reluctant remark, you're kind of missing the idea of inclusive measures, because they're on accessibility. They are not related to the question, does it work for those who are in the auditorium? They're related to the question, who is not in the auditorium because it was not accessible for them, who did not enroll in university because it was not accessible for them. So simply looking at your own teaching experience and being reluctant about inclusive measures is kind of missing the point on why inclusiveness is there. As to the law, I can be very brief. It's the same articles we've talked about in previous conferences. The conventions that deal with inclusive education for primary, secondary education also apply to higher education. There are two nuances or differences I'd like to signal. The access to higher education is not for everyone. It's for those who have the capacity for higher education, which is a different approach than for primary, secondary education, which should be there for all, especially free in primary education. There is impacts on the question, then, do we need to be accessible for all if higher education is not aimed for all? The answer is, to some point, no. You do not need to provide reasonable accommodation nor inclusive measures to a point where you end up damaging the learning objectives of the courses you're giving or the programs you're running, since it's only for those who have the capacity to reach those learning objectives. But what you do need to make sure is that capacity is not the same as handicap. Capacity is not the same as a disability. Not having the capacity to study is something different as having learning needs, specific learning needs, that by providing accommodation or inclusive measures would place you in the position where you could reach those learning objectives. So there is a fine line there between not being available for everyone, which is fine, but using the right demarcation criterion. It's not disability that should be the demarcation line, whether or not you reach the course objectives. It's whether or not you have the mental capacity to do so. And then another difference perhaps with primary and secondary education is that the idea of inclusive measures is perhaps more to the DNA of higher education institutions than it is for primary and secondary schools, and that is because of the sheer numbers in higher education. There are 60,000 students in KU Leuven. There are roughly 8% of them who ask for specific facilities every time they take an examination, which is almost 10,000, almost more than 5,000 students trying to calculate by heart here, and I'm not a mathematician, but I'm a lawyer. There are numbers there, which means you have to standardize. You have to have standardized procedures. You have to have standardized sets of measures you give to, for example, someone with dyslexia. It's not set in stone. It's a starting point for negotiation, what is needed, but without standardized procedures and standardized statuses for students, working students need this, students with dyslexia probably will need this, students who have a visual impairment probably will need this. Without those standardized procedures, it's too much work for higher education institutions who have to cater to 1,000 students asking those questions every examination period again. So there is some standardization, and from standardization to inclusive measures, it's a smaller step than for some primary and secondary schools. So there are benefits, there are concerns, and what we've done is we have a implementation phase that we ran for the higher education institutions. If you want to work with specific types of higher education, inclusive measures, how should you do this? It starts with identification of what is already out there, because the type of reasonable accommodation you give on individual basis tells something about your target audience and what you need, tells something about the demographic you have in your higher education institution. It's about making the right strategy on the basis of what is already out there. Start small, because if you're experimenting, you shouldn't experiment with too many things at the same time. And we've made manuals for higher education institutions on how to do this identification phase. So which questions should you ask yourself about the measures that should perhaps be the first to experiment with? And if you have identified them and you want to have a strategy, a policy about them, then what should be the parts of the policy? You can see that in the manuals we've developed, which type of questions you should ask. Then you go to the implementation phase, which starts with the legal preconditions, what needs to be in your examination and education regulations, and we've listed those items so that they're there for the higher education institutions, don't have to think about them themselves. Start with communication to the students and to the teachers, and we have communication tracks with the type of communication that should be given at which point in time to the students, to the staff. It starts with professionalization of the teachers who need to do this. We have our manuals for each type of inclusive measures telling them what the tips and tricks are and what the pitfalls are when implementing them. Not only professionalization of students, the staff, but also professionalization of students, since there are good and bad ways of using inclusive measures like class recordings. So you need to not only educate your staff, but also your students on how to use the inclusive measures. So we have manuals aimed at the students as well. And then after you've done a first experiment, evaluate. Evaluate quantitatively, which were the parameters you've set for yourself, the key indicators you've taken, but also qualitatively, since as Klaus indicated, quality and quantitative measures are not the same thing. So you should survey your staff and survey your students, and we've actually drafted those surveys that you should roll out and implement in your universities to see if it worked, the inclusive measures. So all of those manuals are out there, and I'd just like to show you one of them, and then I'll open the debate. This is an overview of some of the inclusive measures that we've proposed. So one of them is on give clear communication on deadlines and assignments, which seems like a easy one that should not get any reluctant remark from professors, but in reality we're really bad at this as higher education institutions, because the information is spread out over the many courses in the digital platforms that we have, and it's not centralized in one point, which is what some students actually need. So we always do the same thing. We say, why should you do this? Why is it important? And then tips for a thoughtful approach. That's what we do with all of the inclusive measures. So we've done this, for example, with how to provide proper information. We've done this with how to provide your course material in a digital format, so your syllabus, for example, in a digital format. Why should you do this? But what are the pitfalls? There are pitfalls as well there where you might end up damaging the learning experience of everyone, since reading something on a screen and reading something in paper form is not the same thing. When you scroll, your attention diminishes and you learn less. Nonetheless, there are things to gain there. For example, students who can, if they have it in digital, they can convert it to Braille, MP3, read aloud software. You can actually have hyperlinks with difficult words if you have something provided digitally instead of in a book form. So there's good reasons to do it, but there's also pitfalls for everyone. We have, for example, access to PowerPoints before class, why it's important, what should you pay attention to. There's pitfalls there as well, where you might be damaging the learning process of everyone if there's too much information on the PowerPoints. Interestingly, we had a different inclusive measure on bringing your laptop to class and typing on the basis of the PowerPoints that you've gotten beforehand, so you could just type in the PowerPoints. We've omitted that from the manual we've written, since there's too much educational proof that in typing on a computer instead of writing down diminishes your learning ability. Apart from the fact that having a computer in class diminishes your attention rate by 40%, which is ridiculous. And there's all oil spreading out, so those around the computer suffer as well. But by typing instead of noting down, also your learning experiences is significantly harmed, since you can type too much. You don't have to think which you have to do when you write. So your brain works in a completely different way if you type than as you write. So that is one of the inclusive measures that we had. And then after diving into literature of the education research, we omitted from the manual. There's a guide on lesson recordings, why it's important, but also what are the pitfalls. There are pitfalls there as well. Binge watching will not lead you to better results. Whereas, and you can see this by analytics, those who rewatch specific parts of a lecture, and if they rewatch specific type of a lecture, you know they've been in the lecture because they know what they didn't understand. Those who rewatch specific parts of the lecture are the ones who get the high marks, whereas those who watch every lecture again right before the examination fail. So you can do something with learning analytics. It tells you something about the way you teach. It tells something about perhaps which knowledge clips you should develop, because those are the key concepts that they do not get. And then there's inclusive examination methods as well, on earplugs and headphones to make it quieter during the examination. Important there is that it's non-digital ones. We have a number of examination frauds with Bluetooth earplugs that were used by students who were fed the correct answers to their Bluetooth devices. Draft paper, scrap paper for exams, during exams. Extended examination time, is it smart or not smart to extend it for everyone and not only for those with dyslexia, for example. So we've delved into the literature trying to make sure under which preconditions this could work, and obviously this is one where you could also end up harming the learning experience for everyone, depending on the type of time you need to answer the initial exam correctly. So there's indications there for professors on which type of questions takes how many times or how many minutes for a student to answer, because it's important to come to a correct assessment of the time needed to fill in an exam in order to make it inclusive for everyone and make extended evaluation time available for everyone, because then you have to know what extended means. So there's about 25 of these leaflets for all types of inclusive measures, education measures, examination measures, more technical ones on how to use a PDF in an accessible way, how to use Word in an accessible way, how to use PowerPoint in an accessible way, how you can check with all of those programs whether or not what you've done is accessible for those with disabilities. It's out there. I'll share the website with all of you. We're actually quite proud of this work since there was a lot of work involved, pooling the work of many universities and other higher education institutions together. But if you look at everything that's available now, the manuals, inclusive measure per inclusive measure, the step-by-step approach to how to implement it in a policy level, also the step-by-step approach by how to do it in a reviewing way, so how you could review whether it was successful or not, the surveys to send out, it's ready to implement. So please feel free to use it. That's it for me.
Thanks for this intervention, presentation about inclusive measure. Really useful for everybody, for every kind of students. Very, very useful. Some question here. Okay, Leonor? With the microphone.
Hi, my name is Leonor Mora from the University of Granada, and I apologize because you must be starving for European times. It's time to it's time for lunch. It's okay? Okay. And I just arrived late in this session, so I couldn't. I missed the presentation of Professor Beckmann, so I'm very sorry, but I will enjoy it in the rest of the conference. I have some comments about the intervention of Kurt Willems, because in Spain we recently amended the law regulating the university systems, and it included within the governance infrastructure or architecture of the universities a body that has to do with inclusion of all the students. So that was again in terms of institutionalization of the inclusion policy. But what I was astonishing it was that this career or this improvement in the inclusion policy at high level, in the high education level, was just a reflection of what was going on at the university level. So all the universities have, more or less all the universities in Spain, there are 88 universities. We had a sort of body, a council that deals with inclusions of students. So that was also, and is something that you may be interested to look at, the extraordinary effort that has been done at the university level for the inclusion of students is also due to an NGO very popular in Spain called ONCE, which is the organization of blind peoples, but it also represents people with disabilities. And this organization just won a tender in the European Commission to advise the European Commission how to accommodate public services to the people with disabilities. So it's worth having a look to the work done by this organization, because it's really leading not only the universities, but also the national law, and now is also stepping into the European Union with these ideas of how to impulse, how to promote inclusion. And there's another issue with ONCE, with these organizations supplying people, so that this organization has a biannual conference on precisely inclusion and higher education. And, well, it's a very well-established conference that you may also find interesting, because the findings and the work I put together is amazing. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much for both recommendations. I'll definitely have a look at both of them. It's truly bottom up this, so I'm really really happy with the suggestions to look at other materials as well.
Only one, okay? Because the restaurant is waiting for us, no? Then we can continue with the debate after lunch, but...
Yes, thank you, and it will be short. Okay. It was very funny for me that we are starting to talk about technology, and we ended up talking about management and administration. And that is not by chance. It's an important connection between them. And I was very happy. It's a question to Kurt and maybe Professor Paletta as well, because both of you mentioned about the importance of management. And I've just, it just came into my mind that you analyzed the four forms, the four levels of identification, implementation, evaluation, and optimization. And it was very close to me in my mind, the well-known management tool, the PDCA, the Plan, Do, Check, Act, the so-called the Toyota model. That was, it's a kind of old-fashioned but still working, the self-evaluation model. What do you think? Is that model is useful for education management as well? Or is it possible to use these kind of management models in education administration?
I think I'll let Professor Paletta answer when it comes to management questions. I think any model could work when you use it thoughtfully. They all pretty much start from the same concept. You think or you dream in some of the other models, then you think of what is needed for the objective you set for yourself. You make sure there's measurable parameters and goals so you know whether you made progress or not. And then there's some type of evaluation of what you've done, making sure you get to an optimization of the thing you've experimented. So all of those models pretty much work in the same way. They use different keywords or nouns, but that's more or less the concept behind almost all of them. And it makes sense. You first set a goal, make a policy, then measure whether or not you've accomplished your goals, and then optimize and reflect. So would those work? Yes, but also let's not pinpoint on specific models. I think sound management will make those assumptions themselves as well and come hopefully with good implementation processes. We've tried to provide them with the material, with the groundwork, with the documents, but not necessarily with the decision-making process. We trust them, especially at higher education institutions level, to make the sound decision making themselves. So we didn't put forward a specific model, although, to be fair, indeed, the four phases are a model.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Professor.
What I missed a little bit in this issue is, I cannot Maria. What I do miss a little bit in this approach is just you are referring to a context, to a moment. What I'm missing is the long-term vision. And in my writings on good governance and governance, you should have also a longer term. What about, well, the future? But still reasonably measured to reach a certain goal, output, within a term of 5-10 years. That is within the mission of a university, because we are dealing now with higher ed. And this future, I would love to have Professor Paletta just on how universities should include long-term strategies, because it's dealing with strategy. It's not just about next year or about 2 years. Governance has to deal with long-term. Professor Paletta?
Thank you for this important question. In Bologna, we introduced the Plan, Do, Check, Act process in the strategic planning. I was vice rector for strategic planning. So based on my background, I stimulate the adoption. Plan to Check Act is the naming cycle from total quality management backgrounds used in Japanese companies in 80s. Is a tool that require a culture that promote this approach. And we're failing in using these tools because there isn't the culture, the capacity, the attitudes of the people to institutionalize this approach, this process. So tools, methodology are all important, but what makes the difference is the culture of collaboration or participation. Is an organizational process. So the process is relevant, is embedded in the organization day-to-day activities, and not only on the PDF or in a day dedicated to strategic planning. They're not working. We need to institutionalize this approach in the day-to-day activities. This requires a new culture. It's not easy because dependent by incentives, by relationship. We need to lead this process. It's not spontaneous, natural.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, I think we have to escape. Then see you at 3:15. Okay, it's okay.